But in the end, I think that the ICU and everyone who's in charge of making these decisions should really listen to the athletes because, to be honest, we're the reason the ICU is blowing up and really here. And because without the skaters, the ICU would not be able to have all of us. And
the stadium erupted in premature cheers. Paradoxically, the scene felt hauntingly wrong despite Ilia Malinin clinching yet another flawless, predictable victory. He looked impervious, securing 3 consecutive global crowns with effortless, clinical precision. One slip usually ruined seasons, yet a disconnect lingered between the emotional crowd and the ice. Even the officials agreed, their marks reflecting total perfection. While the scores looked flawless, a rift existed between the physical reality and the emotional atmosphere. Monumental victories typically trigger a raw, visible surge of adrenaline or profound relief. One anticipates an explosive spark, yet in this instance, the expected fire never quite ignited. As his music faded, he remained a statue, showing no cracks in his stoic, icy armor. It seemed he had processed the win long before the first note even echoed. This divergence began weeks prior when his world had tilted during a dark chapter. Entering the Milan Games, the weight of expectation had shifted from hope to an absolute mandate. He stood alone atop the rankings, only to watch his grip fail as 2 falls shattered him. Those stumbles relegated him to 8th, a result that looked modest but felt like a catastrophe. Statistics rarely tell the whole story when an athlete of his caliber falters so publicly. Critics began dissecting his mental fortitude, questioning if his boundary-pushing style demanded a heavy price. For a painful stretch, the young skater offered nothing but a wall of silence to his doubters. He bypassed theatrical displays of grief, opting instead for brief, hollow responses. His careful tone suggested an internal storm, making the Prague comeback a test of his soul. Observers wondered if Milan's ghosts haunted him, but his first glides provided the definitive answer. There was no desperate aggression or flashy need to reclaim his lost golden glory. Instead, a sense of inevitability radiated from him, as if the final score was preordained. His edges were fluid and effortless, devoid of the frantic energy that follows a major defeat. Then came the familiar preparation, a specific velocity that signaled his signature, gravity-defying move. Die-hard fans recognized the choreography immediately, needing no commentary to understand the stakes. An electric tension filled the air because his most famous feat still defies physical reality. The quad axel, 4.5 spins, was once dismissed by experts as a dangerous impossibility. Yet, he launched into the sky without a shred of doubt or visible hesitation. He ascended with terrifying grace, spinning so tightly he seemed to transcend the laws of gravity. His landing was velvet, a seamless transition that sent the arena into absolute, total pandemonium. However, amidst the chaos, Malinin remained the eye of the storm, strangely unmoved by his brilliance. No fist pumps followed. He simply didn't look like a man who needed to prove anything. He carried the aura of someone merely fulfilling a prophecy he had long ago accepted. That realization shifted the narrative, moving beyond technical points and into the depths of his psyche. While spectators saw absolute mastery, such ironclad focus is rarely born without deep, hidden scars. A public failure of that magnitude leaves a lingering shadow that most athletes struggle to outrun. Following his Olympic heartbreak, he retreated into a shell of carefully curated, minimalist responses. He spoke in riddles of professional caution, the trademark language of a competitor mending his spirit. A closer look at those brief interactions reveals a recurring, telling pattern in his journey. He refused to scapegoat the environment, the officiating, or the overwhelming pressure of the moment. Instead, he focused on the invisible weight, the quiet, internal suffocation only elite masters understand. This internal battle carries far more significance than the gold medals hanging around his neck. Malinin is a pioneer, dragging the sport into a new era of high-stakes, acrobatic gambles. Such radicalism requires more than muscle memory. It demands absolute psychological surrender. High-stakes performance leaves zero room for nerves, yet in Milan, his focus finally splintered. It wasn't a total collapse, but the cracks were visible. A pair of minor slips was the only catalyst needed. In a world defined by microscopic scrutiny and relentless grading, even a slight tremor can be a catastrophe. At this point, the narrative takes a far more intricate and unexpected turn. Simultaneously, the very foundation of the game had begun shifting beneath his skates. This transformation wasn't loud or publicized, it lived in the fine print of bureaucratic tweaks. Behind closed doors, the International Skating Union was quietly rewriting the future. Initially, the updates appeared trivial, merely demanding more rigid perfection within the footwork sections. Choreography faced newfound constraints while rumors swirled about slashing the time allowed for pre-show preparation. Taken in isolation, these tweaks seem negligible, yet their collective weight fundamentally alters a competitor's psyche. It forces a total overhaul of their drills, their bravery, and their split-second choices. For a figure like Malinin, a man whose reputation is synonymous with defying the impossible, these shifts did more than just tweak his game plan. They placed a ceiling on his ambition. While the public remained oblivious throughout the Milan event, a quiet storm was brewing in the shadows. Whenever truth remains unspoken, it inevitably leaks through the cracks seen in a sudden flinch, an illogical tweak, or a display that feels hollow despite its technical brilliance. His arrival in Prague, therefore, represented more than a simple quest for redemption. He was attempting to find his footing in a landscape that no longer seemed to value his signature brand of daring. This sparked a unique mental strain. The question wasn't about his ability to land the jump, but the wisdom of attempting it at all. Though invisible to the casual observer, that hesitation pulsed through every choice, defining what he dared to showcase and what he kept hidden. It became a game of safety over raw spectacle, making the Prague event a fascinating study in contradictions. Statistically, he looked unstoppable. A flawless run and top-tier marks secured the gold, yet keen eyes could spot an underlying shift in his soul. That hunger for the absolute bleeding edge had clearly been tempered. His movements remained sharp and athletic, but they were now shrouded in calculation, as if he were skating around an invisible obstacle. Perhaps he was, because once the adrenaline subsided and the rink fell silent, he finally broke his silence. His words weren't theatrical or tearful, they were simply blunt enough to shatter the existing narrative. In the wake of his admission, the memory of his Prague victory began to take on a much darker hue. It was no longer just a trophy on a shelf, but a harbinger of a massive, uncertain evolution within the skating world. The true catalyst occurred far from the frozen stage, a detail many overlooked. Most fans anticipate history-altering moments to happen in the heat of battle. They look for a spectacular crash, a record-breaking tally, or a legendary rally, something visceral and obvious. This shift was far more subtle, arriving well after the podium ceremony when the cheering had faded into a thoughtful silence. Within the sterile glow of the media hall, surrounded by a phalanx of microphones, the inquiry began with the usual predictable chatter. He took his seat with an eerie stillness, appearing neither exhausted nor flustered but entirely self-possessed. It was the specific type of tranquility found only in a man who has already fought his internal battles and reached a conclusion. Journalists naturally prodded him for thoughts on his execution and his recovery from the Milan disaster, all very procedural and safe. He offered brief, surgical responses that gave nothing away, until the conversation took a slight, almost imperceptible detour. The atmosphere remained relaxed as someone inquired about the impending regulatory updates and the future trajectory of the discipline. To the casual observer, this is dry, bureaucratic nonsense that bores the average fan. Yet for the skaters, it is the very fabric of their reality. In that moment, his demeanor underwent a chilling transformation. He didn't raise his voice, but a sharp edge of conviction entered his speech. Abandoning the usual diplomatic filters, he met the query head-on with brutal, unvarnished honesty. He argued that these legislative shifts weren't elevating the competition. They were actively eroding the spectacle for both the experts and the fans. He spoke passionately about the soul of the ice, a delicate equilibrium where raw athleticism meets poetic grace and daring risks fuse with storytelling. His message was undeniable. If you sever that connection, the entire foundation crumbles. He then pushed deeper into the controversy, causing every reporter in the room to lean forward as the conversation transcended mere technicalities. He questioned the very purpose of these mandates, reminding everyone that the competitors themselves are the sole heartbeat of the industry's expansion. Stripped of the athlete's unique brilliance, there is no crowd to entertain and no legacy to uphold. In a profession where sanitized soundbites are the norm, his defiant stance echoed like a gunshot throughout the arena. Silence didn't break and no one gasped, yet the very air in the arena seemed to curdle into something new. This wasn't a flashy transformation for the lens, as these subtle fractures rarely announce themselves with a bang. Instead, they seep into the foundation until every observer begins to link the stray threads together. Every movement, the technical tweaks, the strategic ice coverage, the bold gambles, and that eerie lack of doubt. Suddenly, Malin's display in Prague transcended mere victory. It felt like a cold, deliberate chess move. He wasn't just redlining his talent, but meticulously selecting exactly where the cliff's edge should sit. When a maverick who defies gravity starts playing the percentages, it suggests the world he inhabits is shrinking. The shift was quiet, almost invisible to the naked eye, but undeniably present for those watching. It was heavy enough to sway every future choice, crafting new legacies and altering the vibe of the performance, even while the veneer remained flawless. Once that realization takes root, watching the routine feels like peering through a distorted lens. The focus shifts from the spectacle itself to the hidden motives and the looming shadows of what follows. At the outset, it felt like standard locker room venting, the typical friction between stars and the rulebook. Yet, the weight changed because of who held the microphone and the precise instant he chose to speak. This wasn't a desperate plea from an underdog. It was a decree from the man reigning supreme once more. Victory lends a certain gravity to a champion's words, stripping away the noise to leave only cold credibility. Digesting his message makes it impossible to view these systemic adjustments as mere isolated incidents. They signal a clear path toward abbreviated routines, rigid frameworks, and unforgiving point deductions. On paper, these adjustments resemble a push for modern streamlining, promoting clinical efficiency while quietly rewriting the criteria for what truly earns a gold medal. When the cost of a fall is ruinous, bravery dies. When the clock shrinks, creativity gets traded for safety. Without a single fanfare, the ceiling of possibility begins to descend, inch by painful inch. Competitors find themselves forced into a new tactical reality, favoring sterile consistency over the beautiful, chaotic heart of the sport where anything could happen. Figure skating has always thrived in that razor-thin gap between absolute poise and total disaster. Legendary moments are born from the brink of catastrophe, fueled by the audacity of those who refuse to play it safe. Should that wild frontier vanish, the competition survives, but its soul begins to wither away. It evolves into a predictable exercise in management, losing that electric spark that keeps the world watching. He wasn't screaming about a crisis, nor was he picking a fight with the establishment directly. He simply lit a signal flare that the more observant peers started to recognize in the quiet. When the best in the business start humming the same funeral dirge, the foundation is already shifting underneath. Returning to that Prague performance, one sees more than just a masterclass in scoring points. It stands as a bridge between a golden era of risk and a sterile future that may no longer tolerate it. Every rotation and every landing suddenly carries the weight of a dying philosophy. It's possible that Malinin wasn't just flexing his muscles to prove his current superiority. Perhaps he was capturing lightning in a bottle before the storm was officially outlawed. This wasn't just a high point, it was the start of an irreversible slide into a new, quieter era. The sport drifts toward this new horizon so slowly that the change is only felt once the old magic is gone. Or maybe the turning point is easier to find than that. Maybe the rot began right there, amidst a flawless skate that hid a deeper, darker omen. A secret truth was buried there, waiting to be found behind the mask of a simple comeback story. The public will cling to the easy narrative, a fallen hero reclaiming his throne through sheer will. That version is tidy and marketable, yet it leaves out the haunting whispers that echoed off the ice. The real story lived in the unscripted pauses and the shadows cast by the arena lights. It was hidden in the careful omissions and the split-second glances that most observers were too distracted to catch. That leap likely remains memorable. The launch, spin, and landing remain etched. These elements are tangible, highly visible, and easily measured. Such highlights offer focus, yet they never occur in isolation, functioning instead within a vast and intricate framework. This mechanism dictates which feats earn glory, which face scrutiny, what gains support, and what quietly vanishes. This established structure evolves incrementally through subtle regulatory shifts and minor rhythmic changes that eventually trigger massive, irreversible consequences across the entire professional landscape. Once these modifications finally surface, the competitors have already shifted their entire approach. Contenders pivot, training styles transform, and hazard assessments shift until the old standard feels strangely foreign and wrong. Pinpointing this erosion is difficult because it lacks a singular, identifiable flashpoint for any observer to study. The shift permeates through preferences, through tactical maneuvers, and via those nuanced choices that never grace the front pages. Thus, when a figure like Malinin addresses others briefly, one must scrutinize the subtext buried deep beneath his speech. Ignore his literal phrasing today. Consider the timing, delivering thoughts immediately following a dominant victory to erase uncertainty. He clearly wasn't acting out of a sense of failure or panic. Occupying total authority lends his words unshakable weight, rendering his quiet observations far more potent than any loud warning or dramatic declaration intended to intimidate others. Often, those understated instances possess the most significant gravity. Hushed declarations refuse to plead for attention, opting instead to linger quietly until the rest of reality finally catches up with them. The Prague events are finished. The gold is awarded, tallies are finalized, and that specific chapter has officially reached its absolute conclusion. While that display remains frozen in time, the real mystery lies in the aftermath for both the victor and the sport around him. Will the industry maintain this course? Will rival competitors begin to noticeably change their entire approach? Could the equilibrium between daring and precision tilt further? Providing a definitive answer remains impossible at this early stage. Perhaps that ambiguity is intentional, as genuine pivots rarely announce their arrival with any sense of immediate or obvious clarity. They simply occur, only revealing their true significance through the clarifying lens of retrospective analysis many years later on. Anyone sensing a subtle shift while witnessing that display was not merely succumbing to a trick of the mind. A cause exists for that intuition, even if the evidence remains obscured in the shadows for the foreseeable future. Eventually, when the transformation becomes undeniable, historians may identify this specific hour as the primary catalyst for change. Forget the leap or the gold. The true power lay in the post-game commentary and its hushed implications for the direction of the sport. Observers must wonder, did that display signal pure mastery, or did it herald the very first tremors of a massive upheaval? Share those specific perspectives below now. To follow these hidden milestones that don't look obvious at first glance, join the community because there is a great deal